Okay, so this video is going to be on Crud Actions in Rails, and also we'll be using React in this as well. So we're going to be using one model, and we're going to be doing Crud Actions on one model. So let's look at what that actually means. So when I say the word CRUD, what I'm talking about is this acronym: create, read, update, and delete, or you might hear it be called destroy. Now these CRUD actions correspond to HTTP methods. So remember, HTTP is a protocol for the internet. So if we want to create something with the HTTP method, we're going to use a POST request. If we want to get some data, we're going to do a GET request. If we want to update some data, we'll do a PUT request. If we want to delete something, we're going to do a delete request. So what we're going to do, and then we're going to be doing this on what's called we're going to create a user model, and then we're going to make these paths and correspond them to an HTTP verb, and then this is how we're going to use the MVC framework to get this done. Now this is just going to be more a coding tutorial, so I just wanted to go over some of these terms really quick, but let's just step into the code. So I've already created this CRUD demo project. That's what I ran. Let's go ahead and run. So you can go ahead and run that, and then once that's done, you can cd into that. Now there are some steps, some more setup steps that I need to do. So I need to do bundle add React Rails, because we're going to be doing server-side rendering of React with this. So I'm going to install that. And then I'm going to do a Rails G React install. Now I have a video that is just on getting set up, so if this is a little too fast, you can watch that one. I'll just go over the commands we run to get this set up. So I can go ahead and open this up in code. I'm going to go to my gem file. I like to add my pry rails and my faker gem here. Whenever I do that, whenever I add a gem, I need to run bundle. And whenever I create a new Rails project, I need to create my database. So I can start my server. Now I want to leave my server running, so I'm going to do Command Shift or Command D to split another terminal pane, so I can still type commands over here and still have my server running. So now my server should be running. I should be able to go ahead and check localhost 3000. Yay, I'm on Rails. So sweet. So for this, we are going to create a user model. So when we talk about our MVC, there's really three components. We have the model, view, controller. So the model is really the term we use to describe our data and our business logic layer of this. This is really where all the heavy lifting is, doing all the logic is. This is where we interact with our database. So I'm going to have a user model. I'm also going to have a user's controller. Now this user's controller is going to be able to handle all of these requests and interact with the model and the view to hand back the HTML to the client. And then the view is essentially, this is going to be React in this case. We're going to create React components to handle the view component of this. So let's first go ahead and create a model. So we're going to have a user model. So I'm going to do this Rails G model command, user. And let's say a user has a name, which is going to be a string, and they have an age. Let's actually just keep this simple. We'll just have a name and a email, which is also a string. So every model, we're going to have a user model, and then every entry in our database, they're all going to have a name and an email. So whenever I generate a model, I need to run a migration. And actually, let's go ahead and see what was created for us when we ran this command. So if I do Command-Shift-P and look at user models, so I have in my models, I created a user class. So this is my user model. If I look at my user, I can see this create user migration. This is the instruction to create the user to my database. It doesn't actually create it to my database. We're going to see this in 1 second. Notice how in this DB folder, I don't have a schema yet. Now, if I come back here and I do a Rails Db Migrate, this is going to run that migrations table. And now it actually creates this database table. And I can see that by looking at this schema. So now I have a users table, we have a name, email, and then we also have this created data added that Rails added for us. So now that I have a model, I can go ahead and step into my Rails console by running Rails C, and I can do a user.create. So we gave a user a name, so it's going to be user1, and it also has an email. Forgot to close that. And now I can see this is actually getting created into my database. So there's my name, email, created at and updated at, and then we also have an ID. So whenever we create something to a database, we're going to get back this ID, and it's going to be an integer, and it's going to be unique. And what I mean by that is when I create another user, so let's create another user, so user.create. Notice how this ID is 2. So it's going to just auto-increment the ID. So every user in our database is going to have something unique. So I can get out of this by typing exit. So now I'm back in my project Crud demo, and I have a couple users in my database. The next thing I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to create a controller. So Rails convention is you name your models singular. So we created a user model, but our controllers we want to be plural. So I'm going to call this users. So I'm going to do Rails G controller users. And what that does is that creates a users controller file. So this is where we're going to put all of our methods to handle all of this stuff for our CRUD actions on the user. And with that, I should still be able to go to my app, refresh it, should still be working. So let's go ahead and set up some routes so we can actually interact with our users controller. So what I'm going to do, and let's actually look at this really quick, because this is the flow. Someone's going to type in a URL, let's say it's /users, that's first going to go to our router, Rails router, which we define in our routes.rb file. And then from there, that's going to tell it where to go. And we're going to tell it to go to the users controller. And then we're going to define methods that are going to interact with our database, which are going to return the HTML. And I can show this right now. So what I want to have happen is when I want someone to be able to go to localhost 3000/users, and I want to return back a list of our users. If I try this now, I'm getting an error. And this is saying, hey, there's no route that matches a get and users request. So by default, your web browser is going to do an HTTP GET request. So it's by automatically doing a GET request to /users. And this path is not defined. So let's go into our routes file and let's define that. So I'm going to say, hey, if my server is requested a GET request and it matches this path, users, let's redirect them, or let's send them to the users controller to the index method. Now we call it the index method. It's just a convention because this is going to grab back all of our users. And by default, by just kind of convention, we're going to call this index. So now I define this in my routes. I can go ahead and refresh. And see, now I get a different error. The action index could not be found in users controller. Okay, so let's go to our users controller and go ahead and define our index method. And now I can refresh. Well, now I'm missing the template. So if we look at here, we went to our users, the route was defined, and in our users controller, the index method's defined, but we're not returning any HTML. So number 8's failing here because we don't have any HTML. Now we're not going to use index.html ERB. We're actually going to replace this with React. So let's get this set up with React. So what I want to do is in my JavaScript folder and then in components, I'm going to create a new file. I'm going to call this users.js. And I am just going to kind of write a basic React component for now. So to do this, we just import React from React. We're going to create a function. I'm just going to call this users. So this is just a JavaScript function that is going to return what's called JSX. Now JSX looks a lot like HTML. It's a little different though because we can actually write JavaScript in JSX, which makes this really nice. So we can mix HTML and JavaScript together. So there's some HTML, but then I can also, do like 1 + 1 and actually run some JavaScript. So let's actually see what this does. Sorry, this is all messy. And then just another thing I need to do with this, I need to export default users. And this is just how Rails is going to know how to use this, and it's kind of a JavaScript thing here. So here's just my basic component, and for now I'll actually also put an h1 tag, and we'll just say users page. Cool. So I've defined my React component, which is really the view. This is really the V in my MVC. So let's go back to my controller. And let's tell my controller to, hey, let's render component users. Sweet. So now let's go ahead and test this. I'm going to go ahead and refresh that. It's taking a second. And there we go, users page. And then notice how this is 2. So this is actually doing the math. And just to show you, this is also JavaScript. I could do like date.new. Refresh that. Oh wait, that's Ruby. New, got that wrong, new date. Got Ruby and JavaScript confused there for a second. All right, let's try this again. I'm going to do this in my console date. Let's do a new date. Oh, it doesn't like that this is an object. So let's say new date dot to. Let's just try something like this. Okay. So we'll just go to it doesn't like that it's an object. This is a little advanced for this, but let's just convert that to a string just to get this working. I just kind of want to show that this is actually, we're writing JavaScript in here. So in JSX, it's really nice because now I can just write JavaScript inside of here. So I can, get a date and I convert it to a string, and then we can, show it up here. Cool. So now I almost have this done because I'm grabbing my users that I do a get request to /users. That goes to my users controller. I go get my React component, and then I render back that HTML. Now I'm kind of skipping this step right here though, where I interact with my model. So let's go ahead and do that. So what I'm going to say is users equal user.all. Now this is actually my M. This is my user model in this whole thing. And then I can use this all method to go to my database and grab all of those users. And then something I can do with React is I can go ahead and through props, I can send this users to my React component. So this might be a little confusing for now, so we can just you can just copy this and follow along. But now this users component, it can get props, and we can actually do our props.users. And now I'm going to do my map function right here that we talked about last week, because this is really going to be an array of our users. So I can go through each user, and I can return, let's just do a paragraph. Let's just go ahead and do the user.name. So I'm doing a map function because React is really good. If I give it an array of JSX, it's going to know how to render it. And actually, it's going to yell at me. It's going to want a key as well. So I can do, the key is going to be user.id. That's just something that React needs. And I can refresh. And voila, those are the two users I created in my database. So yeah, I could wrap this in a div. Maybe I want a little more information. Paragraph tag. And user.email. Now this video is assuming you have very to none React experience. So feel free kind of just copy and pasting this and kind of following it verbatim for now. And get some practice writing React. We'll do some React a deeper dive into React in the future. But the point is, I can grab that user data from my database, I can pass it to my view or my React component, and then I can use React to do things like render over it, loop through my users and create some JSX, that kind of thing. And then give that back to my front end. So as far as this is concerned, this one method of getting all the users, we have completed this action. So we defined our route, we defined our method in our users controller, we handled that logic there where we do the user.all call. That's going to interact with our database, grab all of our users. Then through props, we send users to our React component, and then our React component is going to generate the HTML, give that back to our controller, and then our controller is going to finally give that back to the client. So that is a mouthful, but that is what happens. So now when we're talking about the Crud actions, well, what we need to do, so that was just getting all of our users. There's a lot more actions we need to do. So we have done this method, this get users. We're going to need to do a couple other things though. We're going to need to do a get request to user/new. Now what this is going to do, this is going to actually just give us back a form so we can create a new user. And then the client's going to have that form, they're going to fill it out, and then when they hit submit, well then we need to do a post request, and we're going to do a post request to /users. That's going to take us to our users create method, and that's actually going to create a new user to the database. If we do a get request to user/ID, that's going to take us to our users controller to the show method. And that's going to be responsible for getting us a specific user. And then we're also going to be able to update a specific user. Now these paths and these actions, these words we're using, this is a Rails convention. And for now, we're going to stick with the convention. We're going to kind of follow this general CRUD Rails convention. We'll see later, we can change these up. We can create our own paths. We can create our own controllers, our own actions. But for now, we're going to follow this convention. And this table right here, this is one you really want to almost memorize, because we're going to be able to use this for any model, really. But yeah, this is confusing, so let's just go through it and see it in action. So we actually have this get/users taking us to our users index method and displays all the list of users. This one is done. So let's go ahead and do this get to users/new. And that's going to be responsible for returning our HTML form. So let's go ahead and kind of see what this means. So what I'm saying here is, if I do a get request to users/new, I'm expecting to get back a form to create a new user. Now I'm getting an error. I have a no route matches get. So I need to go in and define that route. Now actually, something else I'm going to do is I'm going to actually do a commit. I should have done this at the start. But for each of these CRUD actions, I'm going to commit my code. Sweet. Okay, so I'm going to go back to my routes file. And I'm going to do a get to /users, and then I'm going to go to new. That's what I'm just going to use. This is going to be my guide. I'm just going to follow this table. So get request to user/new. So let's define our route. And then if I go ahead and hit refresh, now it's saying, hey, the action new could not be found in the users controller. So let's go to our users controller and define this new method. If I refresh, boom. Now you're starting to see the nice thing about this pattern, this MVC pattern, is we're getting these same errors and we're kind of just following the same flow. So once you get the pattern memorized and the flow of it, it becomes very repetitive, and it's very easy to code because we're following a nice standard convention. So like I did with my users component, I need to create another view for this. So I'm going to create, let's just call this users new. So now I'm just going to go ahead and import React from React. Let's just create our, so I'm going to, yeah, users new. Actually, I don't not like the name of this. I'm going to rename this to be new user. All right. And then this is just going to return, once again, some JSX. Now for now, before I do anything fancy, I kind of just want to make sure this is working. So we're going to want our form here. We're not going to do that quite yet. Let's just keep it simple and test it out. And then we'll go ahead and add all our form. So here I'm going to export default, new form. Cool. So then I can go back to my users controller. And now I can just render components. And then what did I call it? I called it new user, new user. All right, So I'm going to go ahead and refresh. I think I spelled something wrong here. Render component. Looks like maybe I messed something up in my new users. Nope, I did. I called this new user in that new form. So new user, that needs to match that name. This is one of the reasons I like testing early. Can find these errors quicker, and they're easier to find, and I can just get it to a state where it's working. Cool. So now that I have that rendering correctly, now I can go ahead and worry about how to make my form. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to go back here. So I'm going to do a form component or form attribute. And this is going to be really, it's going to keep this super simple. So we're going to have a name, and we're going to have an input. Let's close that off. Let's do another paragraph. Let's do an email. And let's also do another input here. And let's just test this out to kind of see that it's looking how we want it to look. Cool. One other thing I need is I need a button. Now for this, I'm going to give it a type equals submit. And then we could say add. We can refresh. Can type in some stuff. I click add, but it's not really going where I want it to. It's actually just kind of taking me back to this form. So I actually need to tell it to go to the right method. But I want to go back here. We've actually we have got this part done, the get user / new. This actually returns us the form. But now we need to kind of get this post set up, because we're almost about there, because we send back the form and now the client can type in some info and try to click add. Now we just got to set up this form so when the submit or add button is pressed, we do a post request to /users. So actually how we can do that is in our HTML, we can give this our form an action. And this action we want to match our path. So we want that to match users. So I'm going to do /users. And then I can give it the method. And I'm going to say, hey, this is actually a post method. So now when I need to refresh to get those changes. So now if I type in some stuff and hit add, now I get my route error. So no route matches post /users. But that's good, because that's what I want to do. I want to go do a post request to /users. So let's go to our routes file and define that. So we're going to do a post to /users. Now see, our get and our post, these have the same path, but they have different methods. And Rails is going to know how to distinguish between those two. So this is going to go to our users /create. Then we can go back, grab our form, fill it out again, hit add. And I spelled something wrong here. This needs to go to our users create. Because what this is saying, cannot find the user controller. Well, I called it users controller. So I'm going to go back and grab my form, hit add, and now the create method cannot be found. Sweet. So let's go to my users controller and define that create method. And I'm going to do something here. I'm just going to put a little message here. And then I'm going to put out something that Rails defines for us, and that is params. Well, look at this. So I'm going to go back, I'm going to grab my form. Let's actually type in a name, type in an email. Doesn't have to be really valid. Oh, this is actually something I forgot about. With server-side rendering React, something's not set up for us. We need to like send this token. There's a security thing. For now, we're just going to ignore this. And how, if you get this error, invalid authentic token, then to fix that, because you will get this error when you're using server-side rendering of React, we're just going to do a quick little fix here. We're going to go to our application controller. Where is it, controller? And we're going to just kind of bypass this token. So we're going to say, hey, we don't really care. We don't want that right now. We're just kind of testing stuff out. So I'm going to do this, protect from forgery. And this has to be spelled right, forgery with. And then I'm going to do null session. And that should ignore the token being sent. Seems like I spelled something wrong here. Oh, there's not a. So it's protect from forgery space with null session. So let's go back to this post. So here's my data. Let's go ahead and add. Cool. I didn't get an error. That's fine. That probably means I hit my method. So let's go look at my server. So there's my puts message. My puts message is now coming to the server. I have this controller and I have this action. But what I really want is I want this data inside of this form input. Okay, well to do that, I need to kind of set up my form a little better. So let's go back to my new user form. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some attributes to my inputs. Now how I do this is I do this name key. So this is the attribute name, it's just name. So it's going to be that for both my name and email. And then I set that equal to, I'm going to do this as in quotes, I'm going to do the name of my model. So in this case, that's a user, and then the name of the attribute. So this one is actually name, and this one is email. Oh, sorry, it's user bracket email. Now this is just an HTML thing. So I do the name of my model and then the name of the attribute for each input. So now let's go ahead and refresh this. John, test at whatever. We go ahead and click add. Let's go back. Now I can see I have with params, I have this user, and then inside of there I have this name and email. Cool. So that's I'm now sending, and there's the value. So now I'm sending the data. So what I'm going to do is in my users controller, I can now see, let's just go ahead and also log this. I can do params user. Do params user name, email. Refresh that, John or Holly, whatever. See, and now I can access those actual values, Holly and ASDF. So I could right here do a user.create, name, and then I could do this, so forth and so forth. But what we're going to do is we're actually going to create a function. Now, let's just kind of ignore what this private is right now. So we're going to do private and then we're going to define a function here underneath private. So I'm going to use this private keyword, and then I'm going to call this function user params. For now, I'm just going to type this out. We'll get a little more into this later, but really we're just kind of doing some security stuff here. It's just kind of making sure we're getting back, someone's not trying to do some malicious stuff. So I'm going to say, hey, I'm going to require, so this thing's getting in the way. I'm going to make sure on my params I have this require method. And I'm going to make sure that there's a user param on there. And then I'm going to permit the things in my database, which for this case would be name and email. Now this way, Ruby's going to make sure, or Rails is going to make sure that when the data is sent, it's going to make sure, hey, that user param is there and that we're going to only allow the name and email keys. So if there's other things in here, it wouldn't allow it. And then we can do this. We can do user equal user. We're going to call this save method first. Or sorry, we're going to do the new method first. So I'm going to get rid of all of this. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to create a new user, which creates a user in memory. It does not create a user in the database. So kind of remember the difference between memory and storage. This creates a user in memory. And then I'm going to try to save it. So I'm going to do user.save. Now for now, we're not going to handle invalid input, but let's say someone tried to create a user and they didn't give us a proper email. So we wouldn't want to save that to the database. We would want to say, hey, invalid email or something like that, invalid input. So we kind of can check, did they give us valid input? For now, we're going to assume it's valid input, so this should always work. So the user.save method is actually going to save our user to the database. So once we save to the database, let's actually go ahead and, we actually kind of want to go back to our index page. Now something that's going to be useful is if I go to this URL, localhost 3000 Rails info routes. Because I'm going to have some helpful methods here that can help me redirect to certain pages. So say I want to go back to my index page. I can use this user's path. So watch, I can do this redirect to method, then I can go to the user's path. So what this is going to do, actually, sorry, I don't need this semicolon here. So what's going to happen is if we save our users, I can redirect us back to this user's path. And if not, I can just render new. Or actually, if not, I want to go ahead and render component. Well, actually, we're not even going to deal with this now, so we'll just say handle invalid input here. But for now, we're not even talking about that here yet. So I'll just leave a comment here as like a to do. So basically, we're at our create method. We're getting the params from the form. We're going to try to save the user, and then we're going to redirect back to the user's path, which the user's path does a get request to /users, which should then take us to this method. Let's just do a puts index called. Okay. So it's a mouthful, but let's go ahead and refresh. So let's do John test@test.com add. User.save, sorry, this is not a question mark. Or is it? I don't think, maybe it's not. Let me go ahead and refresh. So it's saying user dot. So something that's nice here. So let me show you this. So when I did my gem file, I installed this PryRails gem. Now I'm actually kind of paused inside of here, so I can actually go ahead and type user. See, there's my user. I'm actually paused right here inside of my code. And see how the user, the ID is nil? That means it's not saved to the database, but I still have this name and email. So I do have this user like .name. And you know, it's giving me some suggestions here. It's like, did you mean user.save? Well, yeah, let's try that. Let's do a user.save. Cool, so that's true. And now I can do like a user.all. See, user.save, return true, and then it actually saved my user to the database. See, user ID 3, there's John. So this tool right here can be a useful debugging tool to kind of come in here and kind of explore your code. Because now my user does have an ID. If I actually went back to localhost 3000, or if I went to localhost 3000 users, see, there it is. It's in my database. So let's just go back to my users controller, switch that to save, and let's try this again. So I'm going to go to users/new to get my form. Let's do Bob, or fake email. Sweet. So now, see how that redirected me back to my users page, and there's Bob. So now that method is done. So when we're looking at our CRUD actions, we've done our get and we've done our create. So for our create, we kind of need two paths. We need to get the form, and then we need to handle that submission of the form. So let's do our next CRUD action, which is a get to user's ID. So we have another get. Now this is going to be used to get a specific user. And so this is why we need the ID. And this :ID, what this really means is I should be able to go to users, and then we had one with like an ID of 3, you know, and that should give me back John. This ID just kind of means, hey, this is almost like a variable. It can be this just needs to be the ID of the user. So let's go ahead and define this, because when I type this in, I get a no route matches. So let's go to our routes. Now I can do a get to /users ID. That is going to go to our users show. Because for now, I'm just following Rails convention, and I'm using this table right here to really, you know, tell me what to do. So I do a get /users/ID, take me to the show method. So I've done this a couple times, so now I know I'm going to have to go to my users controller and, you know, go ahead and define a show method. And let's go ahead here and put our params. Something else I can do is I could do a binding.pry. If I've installed that PryRails gem, I can do a binding.pry, and I can actually pause my code right here. So let's try that. So now when I hit refresh, I'm kind of expecting to be my pry. I'm gonna hit refresh. I'm still getting this get users 3. I thought I defined that, So I'm going to go back to my routes, get user ID. I did define it, I just spelled this user. Now let me show you this. I can go to user, and now I'm in this pry that I was talking about. I can exit out of there. But I don't want to do this. I want to call this users. I want to follow that convention. So I'm going to call that get users and then give it the ID. So let's go back. I'm going to hit refresh, give it the right URL, get/users to 3. And now in my server, I'm stuck in this pry. But this is nice because I want this because now I can kind of type out some code here. So I can look at my params. And I look at my parameters. Oh, it looks like I have an ID. So params ID. Now that's giving me my ID. So I can grab my user.all method. See, there's my user. So now I want to use the ID that was given to me with the parameter and then go find this particular John user. Now what I can do here is I can use the user.find method. Now this takes an ID. So let's just pass this to string 3. And there's John. I think this also can take a number. It doesn't really matter. But I can also pass this params :ID. And that is how I can find my user with the params from the URL. And I use pry to help me that. Now I need to type exit to get out of my pry. If I go back, now I'm getting an error because I don't have a template for that. But let's go back to my users controller in my show method. Now I know I can go find my user this way. Because I kind of tested out with my binding.pry. I'm also going to get rid of that so I don't get stuck in there again. So now I can find my user, and I'm going to want to do something similar here, this render component. But let's go ahead and create a user component and pass it a user prop. So I need to create this component, so I'm going to create a new file. I'm going to call this user.js. And this is going to take one user. So this one in my index, that was taking an array. This one's just going to be an individual one, which will be an object. So if I go back to my users, or let's go stub out this component. So let's do import React from React const user. It's going to be a function. I already know this is going to take props. Let's go ahead and return some JSX. And let's do this for now. Let's just do a paragraph tag, and let's do props dot name. Sorry, it's actually props.user, because that's what I called it. I gotta grab my user from the prop and then grab the name from that user. Then I can export default my user. All right, so here's my view that is being rendered by my controller, and my controller, the show method, is using the user model to find the specific user, and then it's going to pass that to my component through props. And props is a React thing, but that's how we do that. And then that should render that HTML to the client. So it's a mouthful, but now this should work when I go to user/3. That takes me to my users controller, takes me to my show method. My show method interacts with my database, gives that information to my React. My React creates the HTML, gives it to my controller, and then my controller gives it back to the client. So let's refresh that. And there we go, there's John. So if I go to user/2, that's user 2. And I think if we had user/4, that's Bob. Now if I go to user/5, boom, this is going to blow up because we don't have a user with ID 5. And for now, we're just we're just going to assume we're giving ourselves good URLs. We're not really going to do any error handling right now. Cool, so now my show method is done. So if I look here, that's done. I think I'm going to stop the video here because it's pretty long, and I think this is good enough for now. We can talk about the edit and the delete later, but this gets us, you know, a lot of the way through our CRUD actions. I'm going to push this code up to a GitHub repo, and then I'll throw that GitHub repo in the link in the description. This is a lot, and it's going to take, and I know React is probably new for most of you, so it's a lot of information. It just takes some time. So just go through it, see how much of it settles in, and then the more and more you do it, I mean, hopefully you started to see that as we were going through these things, there was a lot of repetition. We were kind of repeating some similar conventions and some, you know, styles of doing it, which makes it easier to do. Once you've done it, you know, for a couple weeks, it's really going to sink in. But it is a lot right off the top of the bat. So absorb as much as you can and then code it out, and we'll go from there. Sweet.